Ever wondered who decides the names of your city streets and bridges? In this episode, law professor and author Rebecca Bratspies will take us through the surprising, scandalous, and sometimes shocking history of New York City's place names. Welcome to the Rebel Rebel. This episode is brought to you by my book, Brand Jitsu. Move your brand from meh to memorable. Brand Jitsu is the battle-tested method I've been using for nearly 20 years to help artists, entrepreneurs, and businesses find, shape, and share their stories so everyone gets it. And where do you get a copy of this amazing book? Glad you asked. Head over to brandjitsu.com to order a signed copy, or get it at Indigo, Chapters, Kohl's, Barnes & Noble, or head down to your local independent bookstore and ask them to bring it in. Welcome to the Rebel Rebel. I'm your host, Michael Dargie, and somewhere across the world from me is Rebecca Bratspies. How the heck are you?
I'm great. Thanks for asking me, and thanks for having me here today.
Oh, my pleasure. This has been a long time coming. We've been going back and forth on, all this stuff, and I'm so glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, but it's happening now. Yay.
Yes. So just so we can, I don't want to geolocate you specifically, but where in the world are you, Rebecca?
I am in Astoria, Queens, one of the boroughs of New York City, the best borough of New York City, I might add. Okay. Right. And I would live right near the East River.
Well, that's amazing. I do love...
Which is to the west of me, but
Yeah, okay. I don't know the area well enough to know one direction or the other, other than I love New York and New Yorkers in particular, because you're just an extraordinary people.
In many, many ways, good and bad.
So many ways. So if we could, Rebecca, why don't we start here? What is it that you're up to right now? And then we'll go back in time and figure out what happened to you that made you this way.
All right. So I have spent the past probably year and a half working on and sharing my book, Naming Gotham, The Villains, Rogues, and Heroes Behind New York Place Names. And it is a gossipy, very quirky history of New York City, using the people that we name things after as a way into bigger questions about who gets to decide what counts as history and who gets to name things. It's been a blast.
Yeah, no kidding. So, all right. So I need to know immediately why this is your story to tell.
Well, it's sort of a funny story. I started working on this project because I used to take a road called the Major Deegan Expressway. It's a road that connects Queens, where I live, with the George Washington Bridge. It goes past Yankee Stadium, and I would have to take it to go visit my parents because they live in Pennsylvania in a place you can't get to by public transit. So I have to drive there. And anybody who's ever taken the Major Deegan knows that taking the Major Deegan, in air quotes, means being stuck in traffic on the Major Deegan.
Okay.
And I used to get so frustrated. I'd be like, who the hell was this? Excuse my language. Who was this guy? I hate him. Uh-huh. And my family got a little sick of hearing me say that. And finally they said, well, why don't you find out? So I did. And it turns out that he was way less impressive than you might expect, given that he has this very significant road named after him. I thought he was, a war hero, maybe somebody who died in battle. But actually, he was a mid-level bureaucrat in New York City and just happened to be sort of very popular with the political crowd when he died young of appendicitis. And so that really got me thinking, well, we have a lot of roads that are named here in New York, and we have a lot of bridges that are named, and a lot of cultural institutions. And who are they named after? And what does that tell us about who we think we are?
Oh, that is cool. And mid-level bureaucrat seems like the right person to curse when you're stuck in traffic, to be honest. I mean, that seems really on brand.
Well, the person to curse is Robert Moses, but right. There's not a lot named after him because by the time he died, he'd really fallen out of favor. He's the guy who designed all the roads.
Oh, that guy.
Exactly.
Right.
He was the one who sort of blocked mass transit and built roads. In fact, built roads with bridges that were too low to allow buses to pass through them on purpose. He's a jerk.
What? Why?
Yep.
Okay,
yep. Like the roads. Yeah.
No, Tell me why he would do this.
Okay.
This is crazy.
So Robert Moses, right? There's a book written about him by a guy named Robert Caro called The Power Broker. It's like this. It's like, I don't know, 8 million pages long. It's a fascinating book because he was a very interesting guy and he wielded a tremendous amount of power. Okay. But he had a very, very specific, highly racialized concept of who mattered and who didn't. And so he put roads through integrated communities and through communities of color in order to facilitate the growth of the suburbs, which obviously facilitated white flight from the city. And the roads were all oriented at taking people from those white suburbs into and out of the city through neighborhoods rather than being roads that were for the people who lived in the neighborhoods. And in particular, he designed a lot of the roads that go to the beaches or the roads that go to those suburbs to have very beautiful stone bridges, but they're too low to let buses go through, and they were too low at the time, and that was on purpose. He also blocked the development of light rail and mass transit because he didn't want people who couldn't afford cars to be able to go to these places.
What?
Yeah, there's a reason that the book is called, right, the subtitle of the book is The Villains, Rogues, and Heroes Behind New York Place Names.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so much of our architecture, right, is rooted in these decisions that were made a century ago or more that were highly racialized. And then now we have this, we have these neighborhoods and we're like, well, it's just like that. But that was all created. The segregation that we have in New York City, and that's true for many, many, many cities in the United States and around the world, was created, and it was created intentionally. Wow. So if we want to solve those problems, we have to understand the history.
That's amazing. What a thing to shed light on.
Yeah, all coming from Major Deegan, right? Who is he?
Major Deegan. Oh, I like
William Francis Deegan. Oh yeah. Well, you gotta represent.
Yeah, I would expect nothing less. Speaking with somebody from New York. So talk to me about how this book has changed things for you. So as you explore this topic and as you share it with the world, what's been the outcome?
Yeah, well, I'm a law professor in my day job. I just cosplay as a historian. I'm a lawyer and a law professor, and that's where my training is. And this has really transformed the way I think about my legal scholarship because I study environmental law, I study human rights and property law, and sort of the intersection of those topics. And I now do it with a much more profound sense of history and of place. And I also teach it differently because, if you want students to understand how we got to where we are, it's really helpful to bring in these materials from a century ago where decisions were made and show sort of what people were thinking about when they made those decisions. That way, these conversations aren't just about like, what are your political values today, but they're about what were people saying they were trying to accomplish when they made choices that we're living with the ramifications of.
Wow. Yeah. Context is so important to reframe.
And it's interesting too.
Yeah.
It's not just didactic. It's also it's really interesting. These people were fascinating. I mean, I'm sort of, dunking on Major Deegan, but for all that he was not a war hero, and it's sort of surprising there's a road named after him, he was a really interesting guy. He was the tenement commissioner in New York City, which is like the commissioner of buildings would be today. So it was his job to enforce the tenement laws. And, New York City had a massive influx of immigration at the turn of the last century. The population tripled in about 30 or 40 years. And landowners figured out that they could make a lot of money renting to these new immigrants, even though these new immigrants were desperately poor, just by building and subbuilding. So a lot that would originally have had one house was built on and subdivided, so it became home for 30 families. And when you're living in those kinds of conditions, disease is rife. There was, fire was a huge risk. And so the tenement laws are what give us what we think of as normal now for buildings, like windows. Every bedroom has to have a window to the outside. Every building has to have a stairway that goes from the bottom to the top. There has to be light in the hallway. All of those ideas come to us from the tenement codes, which were a response to this substandard housing that was being built. And Major Deegan was in charge of enforcing it, and he did a pretty good job. Oh. He also declared war on pigeons. He was convinced that pigeons spread polio. They don't. But he was convinced that they did. But they were a fire hazard. And so he banned pigeon coops on the roofs of buildings. And in fact, he got lobbied by pigeon fanciers. Apparently there were thousands of them in New York at the time. And guess how they pitched it to him? They said, we need pigeons for war readiness.
To send notes.
And he's like, yeah, exactly. And he's like, it's the 1920s. It's like 1930. We don't do that anymore.
We got the telegram.
But that was their pitch to him. Exactly.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay,
so, major figure, not so much, but interesting.
Yeah. Well, okay. So if you were to reach into your big bag of interesting figures and pull out another one, who's another interesting figure that you would like to highlight? Because I'm so curious.
Let's see. I'm gonna pick. There's a bridge that connects Queens and Brooklyn, and it's named after a guy named Tadeusz Kosciuszko. And he was a general during the Revolutionary War. He came from Poland, and where he had gone to the military academy. He was one of the first commoners to be sent to the military academy because he was so freaking talented that the king sort of plucked him out and sent him to the military academy. He came here to fight for freedom. He walked into Benjamin Franklin's print shop and said, "I'm here to fight for the revolution." And Franklin sort of said, "Sure you are." But he sort of put it through his paces, realized this guy was actually a military engineer, sent him on to Washington. And Kosciuszko designed the battle strategy for the Battle of Saratoga, which was a real turning point in the war. It was the victory of the Continental Army at Saratoga that convinced France to sort of become our allies. And he's really cool. But the really cool thing about him is that he was an ardent anti-slavery advocate in the Revolutionary War period. And then after the war was over, he went back to Poland, led the Kosciuszko Rebellion, which overthrew the sort of Russian puppet government in Poland. And then he established a commonwealth that lasted for a while, where he ended serfdom and granted religious freedom. So he was a really cool guy.
Wow. And
he also was really handsome. Which is always a plus,
Always a plus. What is the name of the bridge?
It's the Kosciuszko Bridge.
Oh my! So they went with the full name, because I was like, maybe.
Yeah, and no one knows no one has a clue how to pronounce it. My Polish friends tell me it's pronounced Kosciuszko, but people say the Kosciuszko Bridge, the Kosciuszko Bridge. So you hear all different kinds of names. It was named a couple weeks after the Nazis invaded Poland. And it was named very much as a solidarity with Poland moment. And all the politicians gave speeches about, the people that gave rise to Kosciuszko will not long be oppressed.
Wow. Oh, I love history. Wow.
Me too.
Wow. So okay. So I need to, these are heroes, clearly. What's one of your favorite or least favorite villains? And I take it that villains in your world are like, these are the jerks of the world.
Yeah. So I'll tell you about Richard Riker, who was probably as villainous a person as one. Like if you were inventing a villain, you'd invent him. So he was part of a family. They were a family of Dutch settlers, the von Riken family. And then they saw which way the wind was blowing. When the British came, they anglicized their name to be Riker. So they, sort of distanced themselves from the Dutch roots. They were enslavers. They built a family fortune on the stolen labor of enslaved people that they then parlayed into social prominence and political prominence. And Richard Riker was the city's first. He was the first DA of New York City, and then he was the recorder, which is a municipal judge. And as a municipal judge, it was his job to, decide all kinds of disputes and to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act in the run-up to the Civil War. And that was something that not only did he do willingly, but he also was part of a cabal that became known as the Kidnapping Club that involved him as the judge, the chief of police, and a couple of other high-ranking politicians to not only send people who had liberated themselves back into enslavement in the South, but to grab random free Black New Yorkers, deny them their right of habeas corpus to prove that they were not, in fact, fugitive slaves, and send them into slavery. So that's like the biggest villainy I could imagine. And Rikers Island, which is named after his family, is the site of the jail, New York City's notorious violent jail, which needs to be shut, right? New York City passed a local law saying that by 2027, the jail must be shut. And then a series of 3 laws called renewable Rikers to convert the island, once the jail is shut, into renewable energy generation and storage. And then to use that as an opportunity to remove that kind of polluting infrastructure from the communities that have been most impacted by mass incarceration on Rikers Island and most impacted by the illegal stop and frisk policy that was unconstitutionally happening in certain predominantly Black neighborhoods.
Wow.
So the past is present,
Yeah. Oh, it's so funny. Like we get so spun around these, certainly in the social media world, that we get, puppeted to feel a thing and to do a thing and to, feel something in a moment, when in fact it's, this is a long distance relationship that's been brewing and self-propagating for so long. Wow.
Yeah. So the good news is the jail is shutting. Yeah, I've been really involved in the renewable Rikers movement as an environmental law professor. And the idea is that, first of all, the name is going to be taken off the island. I'm not necessarily in favor of renaming a lot of things. That one's got to be renamed. And we don't know what the name will be. It's going to be a sort of restorative process to try to figure out what would be an appropriate name. There's going to be a memorial there. And then the rest of the island is going to be non-polluting infrastructure that's going to benefit the city and let us take polluting infrastructure out of these historically overburdened communities that were most impacted by what happened at Rikers Island. So, it's sort of exciting to think about making that kind of a change in the world. Yeah.
Wow. That's inspiring. Thank you. This whole show is about people that do the extraordinary, or do the ordinary in extraordinary circumstances, or do the extraordinary in ordinary circumstances. This imagination that, one person can, touch so many people in a different way. I'm curious about the Environmental Justice Chronicles, and how that sort of ties into this whole thing.
So the Environmental Justice Chronicles is a series of graphic novels that are designed to take my scholarship out of which is about environmental justice, out of the sort of academic discourse and into the world. We do workshops with high school students and with community groups, and use the comic books or graphic novels, whichever you want to call them, as a way into that conversation. Just in case people don't know, environmental justice is the idea that all people have certain basic rights with regard to the environment. They have the right to fair treatment and a meaningful involvement. So there's a substantive component. The fair treatment idea is that nobody should breathe air that makes them sick, drink water that's toxic, or live on land that's going to harm their health. and that the environmental benefits and burdens in our society should be distributed relatively fairly. So that's the substantive component. And then there's also a procedural component, the meaningful involvement part, that the people who are going to be most affected deserve to have a voice in decisions about their environment, and that they deserve to have a voice at the moment, not just where answers have been decided and we're like, hey, how about this? Is this good for you? But as the questions are being formed so that they can help shape what pathways we're exploring as we try to solve whatever problem we're trying to solve. So the comic books are the comic book version of that, designed to be accessible to, not technical audience. Works with kids, works with college students, law students, community members, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. Approachable. How do you, it was something that just sort of jumped to mind, and I don't know whether this is a jumping off point, but in Canada, which is where I'm located, we have a really large Indigenous population, as you do in the United States. One of the things that we're hoping to reconcile is water rights, and making sure that the Indigenous people have access to clean water, which they in a lot of places they don't, which is criminal in my mind. And how this might this environmental justice piece affects Indigenous peoples.
Well, in terms of water rights in particular, it's a much bigger issue in the Western United States than in the Eastern United States, because we have plentiful water in the Eastern United States. Right. But that said, there are still communities that don't have access to reliable and clean water, and they tend to either be Indigenous communities or Black communities. And that is a profound environmental justice issue. And the environmental justice movement is about trying to fight that environmental racism and environmental injustice, and make sure that no matter who you are, no matter what language you speak, no matter what color your skin is, no matter what zip code you live in, no matter what kind of education you have or what your socioeconomics are, you have these basic environmental rights of clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. Yeah. We're a long way from that, but we're making some progress.
That's awesome. What's one of your favorite things to do, like just for Rebecca? Like if you were to take off the law professor hat for a second and take out the author, or maybe this is you in a nutshell, but what do you do for you? What fills your bucket?
I love to be on the water. I love to be alongside the water or on the water. So as I said at the very beginning, I live near the East River. I go every day and just look at the water. There's something about flowing water that is so soothing and centering. I love to take the ferries here in New York. You can take the ferry from Astoria down to Wall Street. And sometimes I don't even have a reason. I just take it down and back because it brings me joy. You get spectacular view of the city. There's beer on tap on the ferry. And, it's a fun thing to do. Whenever anyone comes to visit, I always take them on the ferry. If I'm going to the UN, there's a stop right near the UN.
Amazing.
So that's my favorite thing to do. I love to kayak. You can't do a lot of that in New York City, but you can do some.
Okay. Like it's Central Park kayaking? I can't imagine you kayak on the East River, do you?
You can kayak on the East River in certain places, on the Hudson River in certain places. And my sister lives in Pennsylvania. She and I like to try to meet in the middle and go kayaking somewhere.
Oh, fun. Amazing. What's your quintessential New York guilty pleasure? What do you do just for you in New York?
Well, to be honest, I love to just walk around. I love seeing all the people. I love walking down the street and hearing a gazillion different languages and seeing people from all over the world, and walking past restaurants sharing the cuisine of not just the cuisine of all over the world, but the cuisine of all over the world as influenced by each other in New York. I also I'm a big theater fan. I love to go see shows on Broadway. There are a couple of small local theaters that sort of tourists don't really know about that are a chance in a much more intimate setting to see those same performers. In fact, I'm going to one of them tomorrow called Feinstein's 54 Below. It's called that because it's underground on 54th Street. And you can see some of the most incredible Broadway performers on their day off, or when they feel like it, they'll sort of do a show there.
No way.
And you're this tiny little, you're like, you can almost touch them. It's amazing.
Wow. All right. New York hot dogs. Are they all the rage? Is it the thing that
I'm a vegetarian, so I can't tell you about that. Talk to me about bagels. I'm there, but
right,
or pretzels or something.
Bagels. Oh yeah. Okay. Pretzels.
So
that's very New York. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, and I used to live in Philadelphia also, and Philadelphia has a completely different kind of pretzel from New York, and there's a lot of rivalry between New York pretzels and Philadelphia pretzels.
I did not know this.
Yeah, these things are important, but the bagels are really what is. I mean, anyone who comes to New York should have bagels, because most places bagels are just round bread. They're not bagels. Like, bagels a thing. It's its own thing. It's got like this texture and a chew, and to get them in New York, where I don't know, something about the water, they say it's about the water. Some people, like in other places, they actually import New York water to try to make real bagels as opposed to just round bread.
Oh my God.
I don't but yeah.
There's a place in Calgary called Wayne's Bagels, and it's not like the regular, there's no rise at all. They're like, I think, what did you say? The chew? There's a certain chew to it that when you have a Wayne's bagel that it's going to be different than like a department store or a grocery store bagel. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, those are just like bread, in a round shape.
Yeah. Like, what's the point? How did you find the artist?
Bread's good, but.
Sorry, we had a little bit of a delay there. How did you find the artist for your comic book?
Yeah. So I should have mentioned his name earlier. I work with an incredibly talented artist named Charlie La Greca Velasco. And I met him because he lived here in Astoria, and where I live. And so we knew each other, and I sort of went to him one day and I was like, hey, I got this idea. I want to make an environmental justice comic. And he sort of patted me on the head. He's like, oh, that's cute. That's a great idea. Come to me when you have funding. So I got the funding and I went back to him, and he's really been very excited about it. He and I have worked very closely for, almost a decade now. It takes a long time to make one of these books. Yeah. And I should just tell you, we have another project in addition to the Environmental Justice Chronicle. We've been making a series of shorter comics in partnership with the United Nations about environmental defenders around the world. It's called the Earth's Defenders series. And each one tells the story of sort of a population, mostly indigenous populations, that are struggling to protect forests or rivers or other landscape from extraction and development, and talks about the dangers that they face.
Wow. I have such a deep question, but I don't know how to ask it. And I guess, like, coming from a middle-aged white male who also wants to do good things in the world and help it heal and be better, what place does a middle-aged white female have, telling these stories? And is that an unfair question?
That's a really important. No, it's a super important question. People ask that, and it's completely legitimate. It's an important question to ask. What I see is I have a set of skills that I can use to help people in their fight. I'm not leading, I'm not saving anybody. My goal is not to fix other people or their problems. My goal is to take the talents that I have and put them at the service of people who are advocating for themselves. So, for example, when we make these UN comics, right, we work very closely with groups that want us to tell their story. Right. And, we work with them to make sure that the story that we're telling is an authentic story that fairly represents what their lived experience is. we fictionalize it because we don't want to put people in danger, and because we have 5 pages to tell a very complicated story. So we have to simplify it and stretch it down. But we don't do that on our own. I don't go in and say, I'm going to tell this story, right? I find a group that wants to work with me, and then they tell me and Charlie what their story is, and then we sort of work with them to turn that into the comic.
Oh, amazing. That's so cool. You're familiar with the term ikigai? Have you heard that term? It's basically living your life's purpose. It's the idea that what you're doing for a living and what you're doing and putting out into the world is in resonance with who you are in your soul. That it's kind of like it completes you. So you're not at odds with anything as you're building this stuff. So it kind of feels that way for me. That's maybe you're living your truth and doing the thing that you're meant to do, which I think is really inspiring. Very cool.
Yeah. Well, I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, well, it translates. It certainly comes across, and I'm so happy that we got to meet and got to have you on this show. But let me take a left turn. This is right. That's left. You're walking down. You're hanging out by the East River, as one does in Astoria, and you're watching the river flow, and I don't know, maybe there's a boat, who knows? And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, I wish the world knew this one thing. So, Rebecca, what is the one thing that you wish the world knew?
You don't have to stay in your lane, right? I'm a law professor. I'm supposed to teach law students, which I do. I'm supposed to write legal scholarship, which I do. But you know what? I do a whole lot of other things as well. And no one gave me permission to make comic books. No one in fact, they were like, you're doing what? Yeah. Comic books? Really? No one gave me permission to say, hey, I'm going to write a book about history. I just did it. And, now that I've done it, people are like, oh, of course, that makes perfect sense. You can always explain after the fact how whatever you're doing makes sense. But do what you want. Do what you think is the best use of your talents in the world. We all have a set of skills and talents, and the world needs them.
Absolutely. Oh, it's so great. It's very inspiring. What's on your bookshelf right now? Like besides your own book, obviously, but what's the thing?
Oh my God, I have a stack of books. So I just bought a book yesterday that I'm really excited about. That's called, it's right here, actually. It's called Nonstop Metropolis, a New York City Atlas, by Rebecca Solnit and Joshua Jelly Shapiro. Rebecca Solnit is a historian and a feminist scholar, and Joshua Jelly Shapiro is, I think, a geographer. He also wrote a book about New York City. That's how I heard of him. This book is so cool. It's all these maps that they made of sort of imaginary versions of the city that they then use as a jumping off point for history. It's really interesting, it's colorful, it's well written, and it's I'm having a great time with it.
Oh, that's outstanding. Besides bagel, what's your favorite New York treat?
Probably the Indian food from the truck on the corner of, or two blocks down from me. You can buy Indian street food there, like chats and stuff, and it's so good. And the people who work in it are lovely. They have a restaurant, but they started with this truck, and that's one of the cool things. It's right next to the falafel truck and right next to the Mexican truck, and you can just have this meal, if you feel like it, of bits and pieces from different cultures. Yeah, it doesn't all go well together necessarily, but some of it does.
Yeah, right on. Do you travel?
Yeah, I love to travel.
What's your favorite destination? Like if I were to hand you a plane ticket tomorrow, where would you go?
Well, when I met my husband in 2020, I had just come back from sailing across the Pacific on the Endeavour, which is a replica of the ship that James Cook sailed in to observe the transit of Venus when he discovered Australia. And he asked me, where would you go? He asked me almost that exact same question. And I said, Italy. Yeah. And it's 24 years later, and I have been to probably 35 countries since then, but I still have not been to Italy. So I want to go there.
Which part of Italy would you go to? Like, what's the list?
Yeah, well, I would like to have a long time there so I could go to a lot of places. I really want to go to, I really want to go to Florence. I would love to go to the Amalfi Coast. I would like to go to Corfu. I'd like to go to Rome, to Milan, to Palermo. I mean, it's such an fascinating country with so many different places that are all interesting. And, I really want to go there more than once because I don't want to like have one trip where I do all this stuff. I want to go to one place, hang out for a week, find my cafes, meet people, and then do that again in another place.
Yeah. Amazing. So you say like go somewhere, find the cafe, meet people. It sounds like that's something you've done before. So what jumps to mind?
That's sort of the way that I like to travel. Yeah.
Yeah. So you like involve yourself in the location that you're in.
Yeah, well, I used to live in Taiwan, in Taipei, and so my Mandarin is horrible at this point, but I used to be able to speak it adequately, and so that's what I used to do in the summers. Afterwards, was I would like go and to mainland China and just sort of get on a train and go somewhere and hang out and talk to people and see whatever the local sites were because there's always stuff to see anywhere. Yeah. And eat food and check out the cuisine and go on hikes. And, I love doing that.
Outstanding. Oh, that's so good. I think that we tend not to, I mean, post-COVID, now that we're back in the world and doing stuff, I think it's so important to go back and not go back, but to explore these new places and live as a local, if you can, to just see what the fuss is about or see what the world is like living like a local.
To get out of your comfort zone. Right? That's what I was talking about earlier. Like, don't stay in your lane. Go out of your comfort zone. Go where you're the person who can't speak the language and doesn't know how to get anywhere. And, I've like always given directions to people here in New York City and, go where you don't know where you're going and you need to try to stop somebody and ask them in your broken Spanish or Chinese or Portuguese or whatever that you learned through Duolingo. And, that's like, that makes you a better person. It makes you respect what people go through when they come to your country. And, especially New York City, we're a city of immigrants, recognizing how hard that is, as well as how beautiful it is, I think, important.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a secret to tell, and it's maybe not a secret, but I ride a motorcycle. And one of the things when I was younger, I got so frustrated because I would get cut off by these SUVs. And it would always be like an Asian person that would do this. And I'm not saying this to be racist at all. I just didn't understand, but now I do. It took me driving in Asia to understand that, oh my God, they're doing it right. Like this is how you drive in a city of like 40 million people. And, everybody's responsible for everything that's in front of them. And in North America, we try to take responsibility for everybody that's all around us at all times. And it was
I wish we did. I don't think we do.
It was an aha moment for me where I was like, my worldview was narrow because I had only experienced, this one sliver of the world, which is North America. But as soon as you go beyond that and, see how other cultures live and how you move through that culture, you go like, oh, wow, this all makes sense now. And I just, I wish
you stopped. Yeah, like you stop saying sentences that are like, well, surely there must be, because there doesn't have to be, No. And there are so many different ways to accomplish the same thing. And, the way that you do it is the way that you do it, not the way. And I feel like traveling the world teaches you that more than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. If I had one gift to give anybody ever, it would be go see the rest of the world. Because that would change the dynamic of the conversations that we have on the day-to-day so radically, I think.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, there's these people in this world, Rebecca. We call them rebels in waiting. And they are these people who are about to do a thing. Maybe they're a law professor thinking about doing a comic book. I don't know. It is the Wile E. Coyote moment that they step off the cliff and they look down just before they hold up their uh-oh sign. What advice do you have for these rebels in waiting?
Do the thing. Like, life is short. Do what you want to do. Don't spend your time trying to fit yourself into somebody else's box, because you could cut off all kinds of pieces of yourself to try to shove yourself into the box, but you're not going to be happy. It's not going to fit, and the world is going to not get the cool thing that you would do if you did what you want to do.
Yeah.
So my advice to people is always do it. Do it. I mean, don't be crazy, don't be reckless, but do things that bring you joy, that you want to do, even if if they're the kind of thing that people are going to be like, you're doing what? You're making a comic book? Or, whatever the thing is. So what?
Yeah. Oh, love it. This has been such an epic conversation, Rebecca. Thank you so much for sharing, your worldview and, your passion for sharing your gift. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's really been a pleasure. I do want to add that all the comic books I talked about are available for free download for any nonprofit or educational use. You can find them all online on my website.
Yeah, we'll put all the links down in the show notes. And just, before we kick off, where can people find you?
So I'm on social media as R. Bratspies. I'm on, pretty much everything except TikTok, just because I feel like I'm too old, but I don't know. I might be joining that as well. So if you just look for R. Bratspies, you'll find me. I love to hear from people. I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn and on, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, whatever, all of them. And I also have a website. It's just my name, RebeccaBratspies.com. You also could find my scholarship there if, you have a burning desire to read sort of more scholarly works. They're also all available for free download. And and I'm also, like, if anybody wants to email me, you're welcome to. I love hearing from people. I'm easy. My work address is very easy to find online.
Awesome. With your permission, we'll put it in the show notes and people can reach out to you there.
Yeah.
This has been an absolute pleasure, Rebecca. Thank you again so much. It's been great.
Well, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, it's me again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you're an artist, entrepreneur, or business owner who believes your brand could be more than it is, head over to brandjitsu.com and join the list to get your copy of my book, Brand Jitsu, Move Your Brand from Meh to Memorable. I've been your host, Michael Dargie, and this has been the RebelRebel Podcast. It's a podcast for creative rebels and entrepreneurs all over the world. And hey, if you're a rebel or you know a rebel, why don't you head on over to the RebelRebelPodcast.com and fill out our guest request form. Share or subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And thanks so much for listening. Until next time.